She swore she loved me, but her real plan was to destroy my life. If someone had told me 5 years ago that the woman I would call the love of my life would one day try to destroy me, I would have laughed. I simply wouldn't have believed them, because back then I was genuinely happy. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 31 years old, and I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. From the outside, my life looked perfect. My father, Richard Walker, built one of the largest construction companies in the state. People knew him as a tough but fair businessman. Ever since I was a kid, he always repeated the same sentence. Money can be lost in a single day. Your reputation can take a lifetime to rebuild. As a child, I never understood what he meant. Today, those words never leave my mind. Even though my family was wealthy, my father never allowed me to depend on his success. He paid for my education, but the day I graduated from college, he looked me in the eyes and said, "If you ever want to lead this company, first prove you can succeed without my last name." At the time, I thought he was being too hard on me. Now, I realize he was preparing me for life. I became a financial consultant, rented my own apartment, and built my career from the ground up. Yes, people knew who my father was, but very few knew that I wasn't living off his money. I wanted everything I achieved to be earned. Maybe that's exactly why I trusted Olivia so easily. We met completely by accident. It was a warm October evening. After a long day at work, I stopped by a small coffee shop near downtown Dallas. I just wanted a quiet cup of coffee, a break from my phone, and a few peaceful minutes before going home. I had just picked up my latte when I heard a soft voice behind me. "Excuse me, I think you forgot this." I turned around. Standing there was a beautiful woman with dark brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and a smile that could light up an entire room. She was holding the folder I had accidentally left on the counter. "Thank you," I said. "You probably just saved tomorrow's meeting." She laughed. Then I guess I did my good deed for the day. That was the beginning of everything. Her name was Olivia Carter. She told me she worked as a graphic designer for a marketing agency. She loved traveling, photography, and dreamed of visiting every state in America one day. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Time seemed to disappear. When I offered to walk her to her car, she smiled and accepted. Before leaving, she looked back at me and said, "It was really nice meeting you, Ethan." I don't know why, but at that moment, it felt like we'd known each other for years. The next day, we met again, then again, and again. Before long, seeing each other became part of our daily lives. We spent weekends exploring new places, walking through parks, watching sunsets, taking short road trips to Austin, trying new restaurants, and talking for hours about our dreams. I hadn't felt that alive in years. 3 months into our relationship, she looked at me one evening and quietly said, "When I'm with you, I feel safe." I still remember exactly where we were sitting. That was the moment I realized I was in love. The months turned into a year. We celebrated every little victory together. For Christmas, she gave me a beautiful watch with a message engraved on the back. "Forever together." I gave her a silver necklace with a small diamond pendant. She cried as she hugged me. At least, that's what I believe those tears meant. Eventually, I introduced her to my parents. My mother adored her from the very beginning. But my father reacted differently. While Olivia stepped away for a moment, he leaned toward me and quietly said, "She seems wonderful, but don't rush." I laughed. "Dad, you always think the worst." He calmly took another sip of his coffee before answering. "Business taught me one important lesson. Don't pay attention to what people say. Watch what they do." I didn't take his advice seriously, because I was in love. Our second year together felt even better than the first. We traveled across the country. Florida, Arizona, California. Everywhere we went, Olivia talked about honesty, loyalty, and building a strong family together. Every time she said those words, I became even more certain that she was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. On our second anniversary, I planned something special. I took her to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Dallas skyline. The city lights stretched for miles beneath us. My hands were shaking as I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet ring box. I got down on one knee. Olivia Carter, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes. She covered her mouth with both hands before whispering, yes. That night, I believed I was the happiest man in the world. What I didn't know was that I wasn't only saying yes to marriage. I was saying yes to the darkest chapter of my entire life. And if I had known how the story would end, I never would have opened that little velvet box. Our wedding was everything we had dreamed of. It was a beautiful day in May, a quiet ceremony just outside Dallas, Texas. Only our closest friends, family members, and a few of my father's business partners were there. Olivia looked absolutely breathtaking. As I watched her walk toward me in her white dress, I couldn't stop smiling. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the woman I'll spend the rest of my life with. We exchanged our vows. We promised to stand by each other through every joy and every hardship. At that moment, I truly believed every word. I had no idea that one day those promises would mean nothing to her. The first few months of marriage were almost perfect. We decorated our new house together. We spent weekends shopping for furniture. The biggest arguments we had were about paint colors and where the couch should go. Looking back, those were the happiest problems we would ever have. About 4 months after the wedding, I started noticing small changes. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things. Olivia became unusually interested in my family's finances. One evening, while we were having dinner, she casually asked, "So, how much do you think your father's company is actually worth?" I shrugged. I honestly don't know. A few minutes later, she asked another question. Does he own other properties? Probably. And when does everything become yours? That question caught me off guard. I smiled and answered honestly. It doesn't. She frowned. What do you mean? My father owns the company. He owns the properties. They're his assets, not mine. She nodded without saying another word. At the time, I thought the conversation was over. Now I realize. She didn't like my answer. She had been hoping to hear something completely different. A few weeks later, another conversation stayed with me. You work too much, she said one evening. Maybe. So, why don't you ask your father to make you an executive? What's the point of working this hard if your family is already rich? I laughed, because my father wants me to earn everything myself. Her smile disappeared. That makes no sense. It was the first time I heard genuine frustration in her voice. I ignored it. I shouldn't have. As the weeks passed, she became more sensitive about everything. If I came home 20 minutes late because of work, she wouldn't speak to me for the rest of the evening. If I visited my parents, she'd accuse me of caring more about them than about my own wife. The smallest disagreement somehow turned into hours of arguing. Eventually, I found myself apologizing, even when I wasn't sure what I had done wrong. I convinced myself that every marriage has difficult moments. I kept telling myself things would get better. Instead, they only got worse. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. Olivia was sitting in the living room with her laptop. The second she noticed me, she quickly closed it. What are you working on? I asked. Oh, nothing important. She smiled, but something about that smile felt different. A few minutes later, she walked into the kitchen. Her laptop remained on the coffee table. I wasn't trying to invade her privacy. I wasn't even looking. The screen hadn't locked yet. Without meaning to, I noticed the webpage that was still open. It was a legal website. Articles about divorce in Texas, property division, financial settlements, spousal support. When she came back, I calmly asked, "Why are you reading about divorce laws?" She didn't hesitate for even a second. "Oh, I clicked the wrong link. It just came up while I was browsing." She answered so naturally that I believed her, because I wanted to believe her. Another month passed. Then, one evening, she suddenly said, "Don't you think it's strange that we don't have a joint bank account? If that's something you want, we can open one." She shook her head. No, that's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? She looked at me for several seconds before quietly saying, I think you don't trust me. Those words hit me hard. The truth was, I trusted her more than anyone else in my life. That's exactly why I failed to notice the pattern. Almost every serious conversation eventually came back to the same subjects: money, property, documents, inheritance, the family business. She rarely talked about our future anymore. She talked about what my family already owned. At the time, I kept convincing myself it was all a coincidence, that I was simply overthinking everything. Then one night, something happened that I still can't forget. We were eating dinner together. Out of nowhere, Olivia picked up her wine glass and threw it against the kitchen wall. Glass exploded across the room. I froze. Olivia, what was that? She stared at me with a cold expression. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, she said, I just wanted to see how you'd react if someone pushed your buttons. I forced a nervous laugh. You're joking, right? She smiled. Maybe. That night, I barely slept. For the first time since I'd met her, I was afraid. Not because she screamed, not because we had argued, but because I no longer recognized the woman I had married. And I still had no idea that this was only the beginning of the game she had already started playing. After the night she threw the wine glass against the wall, I kept trying to convince myself it had all been a bad joke. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe work was overwhelming her. Maybe I was just overreacting. I searched for every possible explanation. Every explanation. Except the truth. The next morning, Olivia acted as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast. She kissed me goodbye before work. She wished me a great day. A few hours later, she even sent me a text. Love you. Don't work too hard. I let out a sigh of relief. Okay. Maybe everything is getting back to normal. I couldn't have been more wrong. A few days later, I started noticing something strange. Every serious argument happened only when other people were around. When we were alone at home, she spoke calmly, sometimes almost too calmly. But the moment there were neighbors, friends, or even complete strangers nearby, she became a completely different person. One Saturday afternoon, we were leaving a grocery store. I was carrying several heavy shopping bags while she walked beside me. Out of nowhere, she stopped in the middle of the parking lot. Ethan, I turned around. What? You never listened to me. Her voice was loud enough that people several rows away looked in our direction. I frowned. What are you talking about? She raised her voice even more. You always make me feel like I'm the problem. People stopped walking. A couple loading groceries into their SUV looked directly at us. I lower my voice. Let's go home. We can talk about this there. The second I took one small step toward her, she immediately stepped backward, as if she were afraid of me. I froze. Several people nearby noticed it. I could feel their eyes on me. No one said a word, but I knew exactly what they were thinking. When we finally got into the car, everything changed. Olivia fastened her seatbelt, looked out the window, and calmly asked, So, what do you want for dinner? I stared at her. What was that? She looked at me with complete confusion. What was what? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 5 seconds earlier, she had been yelling in a crowded parking lot. Now she acted as though nothing had happened. For the first time, I started questioning my own memory. A week later, we invited several friends over for dinner. The evening was relaxed. Everyone laughed. We shared stories. It felt normal. Then one of our friends smiled and jokingly asked, So, are you two still in the honeymoon phase? Before I could answer, Olivia laughed. Oh, Ethan can be a little hot-tempered sometimes. Everyone chuckled, including me, but something inside me felt uncomfortable, because it wasn't true. I had never been known for losing my temper. As the weeks passed, she started making similar comments more often. Oh, Ethan gets stressed easily. Sometimes he gets really frustrated. Work has made him a little difficult lately. None of those comments sounded serious. Each one was small, almost harmless, but together, they slowly created a picture of someone I didn't recognize. I didn't realize it then. She wasn't telling one big lie. She was planting dozens of tiny ones. One afternoon, my mother called me. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you busy?" "No, Mom. What's going on?" There was a short silence. I just wanted to ask, "Are you and Olivia okay?" "Of course. Why?" "She mentioned you've been under a lot of stress lately." "I have been." "She also said you become more irritable." I didn't answer right away. Finally, I quietly said, "Mom, that's not true." She sighed. "I know. You do. I know you, Ethan." Another pause. "I just wanted to hear it from you." After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. Something was happening behind my back. I just couldn't figure out what it was. A few days later, we attended the birthday party of one of Olivia's friends. The house was full of people. Music played in the background. Everyone seemed to be having a great time. At one point, one of my clients called. I stepped outside to answer. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, no more. When I walked back inside, the atmosphere had completely changed. The room was quiet. Several people turned to look at me. Their expressions were different, not friendly, not welcoming, almost suspicious. Olivia was sitting on the couch. Her eyes were red. She quickly wiped away tears as soon as she saw me. I rushed over. "Olivia, what happened?" She looked down. "Nothing." Before I could ask another question, one of her friends stepped between us. "Maybe you two should head home." Her voice was cold, almost protective. I looked around the room. No one would meet my eyes. It felt as though I had walked into the middle of a conversation that stopped the moment I entered. And somehow, I was the subject of it. The drive home was painfully quiet. Neither of us said a word for the first 10 minutes. I kept replaying the evening in my head, trying to understand what had happened while I was outside. Finally, I broke the silence. "Olivia, tell me the truth." She kept looking out the passenger window. "The truth about what? What did you tell them?" She slowly turned toward me. I didn't tell them anything. They were looking at me like I had done something terrible. She shrugged. "I just told them we've been having a difficult time lately." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "And that's enough to make everyone treat me like a criminal?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward the window. That silence said more than any words ever could. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own life. It was as if someone was quietly rewriting our story and casting me as the villain. Another month passed. Then I noticed something even stranger. Every time we had a serious argument, Olivia would disappear into the bathroom for several minutes. At first, I didn't think much about it, until one evening. I walked down the hallway, looking for her. The bathroom door was slightly open. Without meaning to, I glanced inside. She was standing in front of the mirror, holding her phone, taking pictures of a small scratch on her arm. I knocked softly. She jumped and quickly lowered the phone. "What are you doing?" "It's nothing. You've been standing here taking pictures." She forced a smile. "I just noticed the scratch." I looked at her arm. It was tiny, no bigger than a paper cut. I thought I'd keep a picture in case it gets infected. The explanation sounded strange, but I let it go. Again, that word would haunt me later. Again. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. Something deep inside me kept saying that none of this was normal. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my father. It was almost 11 at night. He answered after the second ring. "Ethan, is everything all right?" "I don't know." For nearly an hour, I told him everything. The strange questions about money, the sudden mood swings, the public arguments, the comments she made to friends and family, the way people had started looking at me. When I finally finished speaking, there was silence, long silence. Then my father spoke. "Ethan, I hope I'm wrong." "So do I. But I want you to start documenting everything." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Save every text message. Keep every email. Write down the dates of every argument. If your home security system records video, make sure those files are backed up. I laughed nervously. Dad, you're talking like I'm preparing for a lawsuit. He didn't laugh, not even a little. Instead, he answered with a calm voice that I'll never forget. I'm praying you'll never need any of it. But if my instincts are right, one day, those records may save your future. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark living room. His words echoed in my head. For the first time, I actually considered the possibility that he might be right. The next morning, I backed up every security camera recording from our house to an external hard drive. I saved our text messages. I created a private folder on my computer. Inside it, I wrote one simple title, just in case. At the time, I felt ridiculous. I honestly believed I was overreacting. I kept hoping I'd eventually delete that folder and laugh about it years later. I had no idea that it would become the most important folder I'd ever create. 3 weeks passed. Life seemed unusually quiet. Too quiet. Olivia smiled more often. She acted affectionate again. She hugged me before work. She kissed me goodnight. She even suggested we take a vacation together. For a brief moment, I believed the nightmare was over. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I answered. Hello. A calm male voice spoke. May I speak with Mr. Ethan Walker? This is Ethan. My name is Detective Michael Ross with the Dallas Police Department. My heart skipped a beat. There has been a complaint filed. I need you to come to the station as soon as possible. My mouth went dry. What kind of complaint? There was a pause. Then he said the words that shattered my world. I'm afraid we can't discuss the details over the phone. Please come in immediately. The call ended. I stood there holding my phone, unable to move, unable to breathe. In that moment, I realized my life had just changed forever, and I still had absolutely no idea what I was about to be accused of. The drive to the police station was the shortest drive of my life, and at the same time, it felt like it would never end. I replayed the detective's words over and over in my head. A complaint has been filed. But what kind of complaint? What had actually happened? No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a single answer. When I walked into the station, a tall man in his 40s greeted me. Mr. Walker? Yes. I'm Detective Michael Ross. Please come with me. We walked silently down a long hallway. He opened the door to a small interview room. There was a file folder on the table, a voice recorder, and a plastic cup of water. I sat down. The detective looked directly at me. Before we begin, I want to make one thing clear. You're not under arrest today. You came here voluntarily. I nodded. But we need to ask you some very serious questions. My mouth suddenly felt dry. Were you involved in an argument with your wife last night? I thought for a moment. Yes. But nothing out of the ordinary. Did you touch her? I answered honestly. We argued. I grabbed her wrist when she tried to leave the room, and then I immediately let go. The detective opened the folder. He placed several photographs on the table in front of me. I froze. The first picture showed Olivia's arm. There were bruises. The second photo showed redness on her shoulder. My stomach dropped. The words wouldn't come out. The detective calmly said, Your wife claims that you used physical force against her. For a moment, the entire world stopped. I stared at the photographs, then at the detective, then back at the photographs. That's not true. He carefully watched my reaction. So you're denying the allegations? Absolutely. Have you ever physically assaulted your wife? Never. Even my voice was shaking. The detective slowly closed the folder. All right. After a brief pause, he continued. We'll need to verify all the facts before making any conclusions. The interview lasted almost 2 hours. When it was over, they allowed me to leave, but they instructed me not to leave the city while the investigation was ongoing. I walked out of the station feeling completely numb. I sat inside my car. For nearly 20 minutes, I simply stared through the windshield. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. First, my mother, then my father, then several friends. I answered none of the calls. I didn't even know what I could possibly say. When I finally got home, Olivia was gone. Half of her clothes had disappeared from the closet. The house felt strangely empty. On the kitchen table, there was a single envelope. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Don't look for me. After everything you've done, I can't live with you anymore." My hands began to shake. I read the note once, then again, then a third time. That's when it hit me. She had planned this. Every step, everything had already been set in motion long before I ever received that phone call. The next morning, the rumors started spreading, first among friends, then coworkers. By lunchtime, almost everyone at the office had heard the accusations. Some people stopped replying to my messages. Several clients canceled our meetings. One old friend sent me a text containing only 3 words. "I'm disappointed." Nothing else. No questions. No explanation. Just a verdict. That evening, I sat across from my father in his office. He listened without interrupting. When I finished speaking, he quietly opened his laptop. "Do you remember what I told you a few weeks ago?" I nodded. He opened a folder. The same one I had almost deleted, just in case. Every text message, every note, every date, every backup from our home security cameras. Everything was still there, for the first time in weeks. My father gave a small smile. "Good." I looked at him. "What's good about any of this?" He leaned back in his chair. "If she's lying, then the truth left evidence somewhere, and we're going to find it." The following morning, we met with Attorney James Howard. He listened carefully to my entire story. He never interrupted. He never jumped to conclusions. When I finally finished, he asked only one question. "Ethan, do you have a single piece of objective evidence showing that the events of that night happened differently than she claims?" I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. Then, something suddenly came back to me. That night, the night of our argument, the security camera in the living room had been recording. I looked at my attorney. He looked back at me. For the first time, there was hope in both of our eyes. "Please," he said quietly, "tell me that recording still exists." I didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time in many days, I felt something I thought I'd already lost: hope. That same evening, my attorney and I returned to my house. For the first time since Olivia had left, the silence inside felt overwhelming. I switched on the lights in the living room. Everything looked exactly the way it had just a few weeks earlier. The same couch, the same family photos, the same room, where I was now being accused of a crime I didn't commit. I retrieved the external hard drive containing the backup recordings from our home security cameras. James connected it to his laptop. "Let's see what the truth left behind," he said. We opened the recording from the night of our argument. The living room appeared on the screen. At first, nothing seemed unusual. I was sitting on the couch. Olivia was walking around the room. We were clearly having a serious conversation. The cameras didn't record audio, but it was obvious the discussion was becoming more emotional. A few minutes later, she suddenly turned toward the front door. I stood up. I walked a few steps, and just as I had told Detective Ross, I gently grabbed her wrist. Not violently, not aggressively. I didn't shove her. I didn't strike her. I simply stopped her for a brief moment, and then immediately let go. She took several more steps. Then, she stopped. She looked back at me. She made sure I wasn't following her anymore. And then, something happened that still sends chills down my spine. She slammed her own forearm against the sharp edge of the wooden table. Hard. I froze, even watching the recording weeks later. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The video clearly showed her doing it to herself. One hit, a pause, then another hit. She rubbed her arm, examined the spot where the redness was already beginning to appear, and calmly walked out of the room. Neither James nor I spoke for several seconds. The room was completely silent. Finally, he rewound the footage. He watched the scene again. Then again. After the third viewing, he slowly closed the laptop. If this recording is authentic, it could completely change this case. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe again, but James immediately raised his hand. Don't celebrate yet. I looked at him. Why not? Because we're not finished. He explained that the recording would have to be examined by independent forensic experts. They would need to confirm that the file hadn't been altered, that it had been recorded by the home's security system, that the timestamps were genuine, and that there had been no editing or manipulation. Only then could it become reliable evidence in court. A few days later, forensic specialists received a copy of the recording. Those days felt endless. I barely left the house. The rumors continued spreading. Social media had already reached its own conclusions. Some people called me a monster. Others said everyone deserved a fair investigation. But those voices were much quieter. That's when I realized how quickly people can decide someone is guilty before all the facts are known. A week later, James called me. For the first time, I heard relief in his voice. Ethan, the experts are finished. I held my breath. And the recording is authentic. No edits. No manipulation. The file is completely genuine. I closed my eyes. For a brief moment, I wanted to celebrate, but James stopped me once again. Remember, we still have a trial ahead of us. The other side will do everything possible to explain that video in a different way. A few days later, we received another surprise. The prosecution finally disclosed its evidence. Inside the case file were photographs of Olivia's injuries, a medical report, and a list of witnesses. I carefully read every name. Almost every witness was one of Olivia's friends, people who had only heard her version of the story. That was the moment I finally understood. None of this had been spontaneous. It had been planned. Carefully, patiently, methodically. James placed the folder on the table. Ethan, we're not just trying to prove your innocence anymore. We have to show the jury the entire picture, because one video alone may not be enough. Then, something suddenly came back to me. Months earlier, after one of our arguments, I had walked past the bathroom and seen Olivia taking pictures of a tiny scratch on her arm. At the time, it had seemed strange. Now, everything was beginning to make sense. We still didn't know how far she had gone, but one thing had become perfectly clear. The courtroom would be the place where lies finally collided with facts. And no one inside that courtroom had any idea what piece of evidence was about to leave the entire room in stunned silence. The morning of the trial arrived faster than I was ready for. I barely slept the night before. No matter how many times James told me we had strong evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire future depended on what would happen inside that courtroom. When we arrived at the courthouse, reporters were already waiting outside. Television cameras, photographers, people holding microphones. Some of them shouted my name as I walked toward the entrance. Mr. Walker, did you assault your wife? Do you have anything to say to the public? I kept my head down. James placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't answer. I nodded. Inside the courtroom, everything felt strangely quiet. The silence was almost unbearable. Then I saw Olivia. She was sitting across the room beside her attorney. She looked calm, confident, as if she already knew how the story would end. For a brief moment, our eyes met. She didn't smile. She simply stared at me, then looked away. The judge entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. The trial had officially begun. The prosecutor delivered the opening statement first. He described Olivia as a young woman who had lived in fear inside her own marriage. He claimed she had stayed silent for months before finally finding the courage to come forward. As I listened, it felt like he was describing someone else's life, not mine. Then Olivia took the witness stand. She spoke softly. Sometimes her voice trembled. Several times she paused as if she were struggling to continue. She described arguments. She claimed she had been afraid of me. She said she felt trapped. She even cried. Some members of the jury looked genuinely moved. I sat perfectly still. Every word hurt. Not because it was true, but because she told the story so convincingly. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then it was James' turn. He stood slowly, walked toward the witness stand, and smiled politely. Mrs. Walker, I only have a few questions. She nodded confidently. Of course. You testified that my client became physically aggressive during the argument on March 18th. Yes. And you stated that the bruises on your arm are caused by him. That's correct. James nodded. You are absolutely certain? I am. He walked back to the defense table, picked up a remote control, then looked at the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce Security Exhibit A. The courtroom lights dimmed. A large monitor lit up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The recording began. Everyone watched in complete silence. There I was, sitting on the couch, Olivia walking through the room. The argument, her heading toward the door, me briefly taking hold of her wrist, and immediately letting go. Then, the moment, she looked around, made sure I wasn't near her, and slammed her own arm into the corner of the table. Once, twice, the room fell completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the prosecutor seemed frozen. The video continued playing. It clearly showed that I never struck her, never pushed her, never followed her after letting go. James paused the recording. He turned toward Olivia. Mrs. Walker, would you like to explain what the jury just watched? For the first time since the trial had begun, she didn't answer immediately. She looked at the screen, then at the jury. Finally, she quietly said, that video doesn't show everything. James nodded. I agree. It doesn't. He stepped closer. But it does show something extremely important. It shows that you caused at least one of your own injuries. Olivia remained silent. James continued. You testified under oath that every bruise on your arm was caused by my client. Do you still stand by that statement? She hesitated. Her attorney quickly stood. Objection. The judge looked toward James. Counselor. James calmly replied, I'm testing the credibility of the witness, Your Honor. The judge thought for a moment, then nodded. Overruled. You may answer the question. Every person in the courtroom turned toward Olivia. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Several long seconds passed. Finally, she quietly said, I don't remember. James didn't smile. He simply walked back to the defense table, opened another folder, then looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, the defense has additional evidence that further explains the events leading up to these allegations. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at James. We hadn't discussed this. He slowly removed several printed pages from a folder. I believe this changes everything. At that moment, I realized the trial wasn't over. It had only just begun. The courtroom was so quiet. You could hear papers being turned. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was looking at the folder in James' hands. Even I didn't know what he was about to reveal. He placed several documents on the evidence table. Then he looked at the judge. Your Honor, everything I'm about to present has already been disclosed to the court and the prosecution in accordance with the rules of discovery. The judge nodded. You may proceed. James faced the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've already seen the security footage. It doesn't answer every question, but it raises an important one. If the defendant wasn't responsible for at least some of the injuries, then how reliable is the rest of the accusation? He picked up the first document. This is the forensic report confirming that the security footage is authentic. No edits. No missing frames. No evidence of manipulation. The report was handed to the jury. Then James held up another document. This is a timeline created from phone records, security footage, and other verified evidence. A large screen displayed the timeline. Minute by minute, the events of that evening appeared. The security camera timestamp. The moment Olivia left the living room. The time she called a friend. The time she later contacted the authorities. Everything was laid out in chronological order. James spoke calmly. The timeline itself doesn't prove motive, but it allows us to compare testimony with independently verified events. The prosecutor stood. Objection. Counsel is drawing conclusions. The judge looked toward James. Stay with the evidence. Yes, Your Honor. James nodded. He turned back to the jury. Let's do exactly that. He displayed another exhibit, a series of text messages exchanged over several months. Some were ordinary. Others showed repeated conversations about money, property, and the future of the Walker family's wealth. James didn't speculate. Instead, he asked simple questions. Mrs. Walker, do you recognize these messages? Olivia looked at the screen. Yes. You sent them? Yes. Are they complete and accurate? As far as I know. Yes. James thanked her. Then he projected another message onto the screen. It had been sent months before the investigation began. Olivia had written, I still don't understand why everything is in your father's name. Another message appeared. Have you ever asked him when the company will become yours? Then another. If something happened to him, what would the ownership look like? The courtroom remained silent. James never claimed these messages proved criminal intent. Instead, he addressed the jury. These messages don't tell you why Mrs. Walker asked these questions, but they do provide context that you may consider alongside all the other evidence. The prosecutor immediately began redirect questioning. Mrs. Walker, isn't it true that married couples often discuss finances? Yes. And isn't that exactly what these messages show? Yes. James didn't object. He simply wrote something in his notebook. Then he stood again. I agree. Married couples often discuss finances. He paused, but context matters. He walked to another screen. This exhibit contains messages exchanged after the couple separated. Again, every document had already been admitted into evidence. James highlighted one exchange. Olivia had written, You'll regret choosing your father's money over me. Another message followed a few days later. This isn't over. James looked toward the jury. I'm not asking you to guess what these messages mean. I'm asking you to read the exact words. He stepped away from the screen. Then he turned toward Olivia one final time. Mrs. Walker, when you testified yesterday, you told this jury your actions were motivated entirely by fear. Yes. Can you explain why, after leaving the home, your messages repeatedly focused on money, ownership, and the Walker family's assets? Olivia remained silent. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. After several seconds, she answered quietly, I was angry. James nodded. That's certainly possible. He returned to the defense table. Then he picked up one final exhibit. The defense also calls Detective Michael Ross. The detective walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, James asked Detective Ross, as the lead investigator, did you rely solely on the original complaint? No. What else did your investigation include? We reviewed physical evidence, interviewed witnesses, collected digital records, and examined the security footage after it was provided. And after reviewing all available evidence, did your understanding of the case change? The detective answered carefully. My investigation evolved as additional evidence became available. He looked toward the jury. That's exactly why investigations must consider all relevant evidence before reaching conclusions. The courtroom was silent once again. I looked across the room. For the first time, Olivia no longer looked confident. She looked uncertain, not because anyone had proven every allegation false, but because the certainty of her story had begun to unravel. As the judge announced a recess, I glanced at James. He quietly leaned toward me. We're making progress. But the hardest part, he closed the folder, is still ahead. The final witnesses would testify tomorrow, and by the end of the next day, the jury would decide whose version of the story they believed. I barely slept the night before the final day of the trial. By sunrise, I was already sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. No matter what happened that day, my life would never be the same again. When James arrived to pick me up, he looked calmer than I felt. "You ready?" I gave him an honest answer. "No." He nodded. Neither is anyone else who walks into a courtroom with their future on the line. We drove to the courthouse in silence. Outside, the crowd was even larger than before. Reporters filled the sidewalk. Camera crews waited by the entrance. The story had become headline news across Dallas. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was different. The confidence Olivia had shown during the first day of trial had faded. She looked exhausted. She avoided looking in my direction. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The final day had begun. The prosecution delivered its closing argument first. The prosecutor reminded the jury that domestic violence cases are often complex and that not every event is captured on video. He argued that the jury should consider all of the testimony and evidence presented throughout the trial. Then James stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to perform for the jury. Instead, he walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about assumptions. It's not about rumors. And it's not about choosing who seems more believable. It's about evidence." He paused. "You watched the security footage. You heard the forensic experts confirm it had not been altered. You reviewed the timeline. You examined the messages. And you listened to every witness." He looked toward the jury. "You are not being asked to decide whether this marriage failed. It clearly did. You are being asked something much simpler. Has the accusation been proven by reliable evidence?" The courtroom remained silent. James continued. "The law requires decisions based on facts, not sympathy, not speculation." He returned to the defense table. That was all he said. It was enough. The judge gave final instructions to the jury. Then they left the courtroom to begin deliberations. The wait felt endless. 1 hour, then 2, then 3. Nobody spoke very much. Every time the courtroom door opened, my heart started racing. Finally, the bailiff walked in. "The jury has reached a verdict." Every person in the room stood. The jurors slowly returned to their seats. The courtroom became completely silent. The judge looked toward the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have." The clerk accepted the written verdict. She unfolded the paper. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire room stopped breathing. She read the decision aloud. Based on the evidence presented, the jury found that the prosecution had not proven the allegation beyond the applicable legal standard. A wave of emotion hit me all at once. I closed my eyes. For months, I had carried the weight of being treated like someone I wasn't. Now, for the first time, I felt that weight begin to lift. Around the courtroom, people reacted quietly. Some looked surprised. Others simply nodded. The judge thanked the jurors for their service. Before ending the proceedings, he addressed everyone in the courtroom. "This case reminds us why courts rely on evidence rather than assumptions. Serious allegations deserve serious investigation, and every person is entitled to a fair process." With that, he adjourned the case. As people began leaving, I remained seated. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. Months of fear. Sleepless nights. Damaged friendships. Lost clients. None of that disappeared because the trial had ended. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward me once again. Microphones filled the space between us. One journalist called out, "Mr. Walker, how do you feel after today's verdict?" I stopped walking. I looked directly at the cameras. Then I answered, "I hope people remember one thing. Every accusation deserves to be taken seriously, but every investigation deserves to be completed before anyone decides the truth. I don't want anyone else to go through what both of us have been through. Without saying another word, I walked away, as James caught up with me. He smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's over." I looked at the courthouse behind us, then quietly answered, "No. The trial is over. But rebuilding my life starts today." 1 year has passed since the trial ended. Sometimes, it feels like it happened yesterday. Other times, it feels like a lifetime ago. People often ask me the same question. Did your life go back to normal? The honest answer is, no. Some things never return to the way they were. And maybe they're not supposed to. After the trial, I took several months away from work. Not because I wanted to quit, because I needed time to remember who I was before everything happened. For months, my life had revolved around police interviews, court hearings, lawyers, evidence, and trying to prove something I already knew was true, that I was innocent. Eventually, I returned to the family business. Not everyone welcomed me back immediately. A few clients never returned. Some business relationships had already been damaged beyond repair. But something else happened. People who had quietly watched the trial, people who had waited before making judgments, started reaching out. Some apologized. Others simply said, "I'm glad the truth came out." I appreciated every one of those conversations. But I also learned something important. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory, and trust takes much longer to rebuild than it does to lose. My relationship with my parents became stronger than ever. My father never once told me, "I told you so." Instead, one evening, we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He smiled and said, "You survived something that would have broken many people." I looked at him and quietly replied, "I didn't survive alone." Because the truth was, without my family, without James, without the investigators who followed the evidence wherever it led, I don't know where I would be today. People often ask what happened to Olivia. The answer is simpler than most expect. After the trial, we finalized our divorce. We never spoke again. I don't know where she lives today. And honestly, I stopped trying to find out. Some chapters are meant to stay closed. Holding on to anger would only allow the past to keep controlling my future. So I made a choice. I let go. Not because I forgot, but because I wanted my life back. About 8 months after the trial, I began volunteering with an organization that helps people understand the legal process during difficult family disputes. I wasn't there to tell people what to think. I wasn't there to choose sides. I was there to remind them of one simple truth. Evidence matters. Fair investigations matter. And every person deserves to be heard before conclusions are made. That experience changed me. It reminded me that every courtroom has more than one story, and that real justice requires patience. Today, when I walk into my home, I no longer think about the cameras that once protected me. I think about peace. I think about second chances. I think about how close I came to losing everything. Sometimes I still open the folder on my computer, the one labeled. Just in case, I don't open it because I'm afraid anymore. I open it because it reminds me of something I'll never forget. The truth doesn't always speak first. Sometimes it arrives quietly. One document, one recording, one honest witness at a time. If you've watched my story from beginning to end, thank you. I didn't tell it to gain sympathy. I told it because lives can change in a single phone call, because assumptions can spread faster than facts, and because I hope my experience encourages people to wait for the whole story before making up their minds. If there's one lesson I carry with me today, it's this. Character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when everything you've built is tested. Mine was, and although I lost my marriage, I found something far more valuable. The truth, my family, and the chance to start over. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking back anymore. I was finally looking forward. The end.